Zenara Velt knocked Win Carvon's pocket watch to the floor of the Halstead Grand Ballroom, while the string quartet was still playing and none of the 400 guests had yet looked away. Not in a back corridor, not in the dim anteroom where an accident might be passed off as clumsiness before it had witnesses. Right there under 8 crystal chandeliers, in front of the collectors and investment partners and industry editors who had traveled from Geneva and Tokyo and Sao Paulo to see Carvon timepieces celebrate its 25th year. Win's most sacred possession struck the marble floor and the crystal face cracked clean across the center. The sound was almost nothing, a small dry snap beneath the music. But Win heard it the way you hear the things you have been dreading without admitting it. Win Carvon, 34-year-old wife of Corbett Mays and the secret controlling owner of $1.7 billion watch house, stood near the East Bar in a plain black dress with no diamonds, no title, and nothing on her body that announced who she was. Only the pocket watch, a flat silver case, palm-sized, unpolished, engraved with a tidal wave motif so small that most people had to look in close to see it. To everyone in that room who did not know better, it looked like something a grandmother kept at the back of a drawer. To Carvon timepieces, it was the beginning of everything. The watch was called the First Movement. Win's grandfather, Devel Carvon, had built it by hand in a rented one-room workshop in Savannah in 1961, before the company had a name, before it had a single investor, before it had anything except his obsession with a tidal escapement mechanism no other watchmaker had attempted. The First Movement contained the original design, the one that became the founding patent, the one that built the house. It was registered as a protected artifact in 3 countries, and it had been pressed into Win's hand by her mother, Selma Carvon, on a Tuesday night in March 9 years ago, when the doctors had quietly stopped revising the prognosis. "Keep what started it," Selma had said. "Everything else is just consequence." That was the thing no one in the ballroom understood. Not the collectors at the display cases, not the journalists near the entrance. Not Corbett Mays, 37, Win's husband of 6 years, who had spent the past 4 months telling investment partners that his family was in private discussions to secure a controlling stake in Carvon timepieces. Not Zenara Velt, 30, a luxury event consultant who had arrived at the gala on Corbett's arm, and who had, in the 40 minutes since their arrival, positioned herself close enough to him that the event photographers kept catching them in the same frame. And not Hildred Mays, 62, Corbett's mother and the social engine of the Mays family, who stood near the main display case with her champagne glass lifted toward a cluster of investors. "The Mays name means something in this city," Hildred said loudly enough that the group around her went quiet to listen. "When we say we have proximity to Carvon, people understand what that implies." Win heard her. She always heard her. She had been the silent majority owner of this building for 9 years. She walked through it every weekday morning before the public doors opened. She signed documents under the Carvon Legacy Trust before any public-facing executive put his name to anything. She made decisions about staffing and acquisitions and preservation that moved through the house the way a current moves through water, present everywhere, visible nowhere. And she managed, to someone like Hildred, to look entirely like a woman who had married well above her station and was quietly grateful for the altitude. That had never been accidental. When Win first met Corbett, she had not yet become what her mother's death had made her. She had been a woman in her late 20s, fresh inside a grief she didn't know how to carry, holding a trust document she barely understood, wearing a coat she'd bought secondhand because the city rewarded visibility and she was still figuring out how to survive it. Corbett had liked her then. He had liked her without knowing what she came from. For a little while, that had felt like the most honest thing in her life. Her attorneys had other reasons for the privacy. The trust structure, protecting Carvon from predatory acquisition, required that controlling ownership remain out of public view until specific debt instruments matured. A premature disclosure could have attracted hostile bids, litigation from distant relatives who had been circling the estate for years, challenges that would have cost the company money it needed elsewhere. She had told herself it was protection, for the company, for her marriage, for the part of herself that still wanted to believe love did not require a balance sheet. By the time she understood there would never be a right time to tell Corbett, it was because she had learned that the man she was protecting had started using Carvon's name like a borrowed coat in rooms. She had quietly opened for him. Carvon's public chairman was Oswin Farr, 57, a silver-haired career watchmaker who had served the house since Selma's era. He was one of fewer than a dozen people who understood the difference between his name on the quarterly presentations and Wyn's name on the trust instrument that controlled everything beneath them. Oswin had called her 3 weeks before the gala with something he described as a delicate matter. Corbett had been meeting with a luxury investment broker named Fenwick Dale, 44. Fenwick had been distributing polished proposal folders to fund managers and private collectors, suggesting that the Mays family was positioned to participate in a private expansion of Caervon's operations. The language was careful. It said things like preferred alignment and exclusive access and founding family adjacency. It never said controlling interest outright. It didn't need to. Wyn sat with that information for 2 weeks before she let herself understand what she was sitting with. The morning of the gala, she went to the workshop. Bex Nolan, 44, Caervon's archive curator and the keeper of every founding document the house had ever produced, met her at the blueprint table with a velvet tray and an expression that had gone past worry into something quieter. "I want to show you something before tonight," Bex said. She placed a folder on the table. Inside was a loan request form bearing Caervon's letterhead. The crest was right. The typeface was right. The authorization number in the lower left corner was not. It was a sequence from an old benefit dinner 2 years prior, an event code, not a jewelry release clearance. Someone had taken a piece of Caervon's public-facing paperwork and altered it to look like something with legal weight. Wyn photographed it carefully. She sent the images to Oswin, who replied in under 2 minutes. He had already seen a second copy. It had come from the styling salon Hildred Mays had rented for the family's gala fittings. Wyn did not go to the salon. She did not call Corbett. She did not send a message to Fenwick or arrange anything that would have given the people involved a warning they had not earned. She only locked the photographs behind her own timestamp, checked the watch's clasp, put on her dress, and arrived at the Halstead Grand alone. Corbett was already in the room when she got there. He stood near the main display case with Zinara at his side and the angle of her body toward his. The way she leaned when she laughed, the way her fingers touched his sleeve as if adjusting something, was not how professional colleagues stood in a room together. Wyn recognized it because it was a body language she had not seen aimed at herself in a long time. Hildred found her within minutes. "Wyn, darling, we were beginning to think you'd skip it." The smile she gave was the kind that implied an insult without specifying one. "Come photograph with the family. Try to look like you're enjoying yourself." Prella Mays, 26, Corbett's younger sister, appeared at Hildred's shoulder with a champagne flute and a gaze that traveled from Wyn's shoes to her neckline before settling into something that resembled pity. "You can fix your hair in the restroom first," Prella offered. "There's time." The family photograph happened 30 minutes later. Corbett moved to the center. Zinara stepped to his left without anyone asking her to. When the photographer glanced at Wyn, Hildred shifted her position, subtly, the way people move when they want a frame adjusted without saying so out loud. The flash went off. Wyn was at the very edge of it, half out of the picture. She looked at Corbett. He looked back at her, without anything resembling apology. Then Zinara's friend, Vila Dunn, 31, a sharp-faced woman who worked in social media and had been laughing loudly for most of the evening, turned to the small group nearby with the kind of cheerful cruelty that passes for wit at events like this. "Wait, is that a pocket watch? On a chain? Feel like, actually?" Soft laughter from the people close enough to hear. Zinara turned toward Wyn and lowered her eyes to the chain. "It's vintage," she said. The word carried everything she meant it to carry. "Where does something like that even come from?" "My grandfather made it," Wyn said. Zinara made a small sound, the sound of someone filing information away as confirmation of something they already believed. "You should be careful on these floors," she said. "Marble is brutal with old pieces." "I know what I'm holding," Wyn said quietly. Zinara reached out, her fingers touched the chain. Wyn said it once, "Don't." Zinara smiled and pulled anyway. The chain held, but the sudden tension was enough to dislodge the watch from Wyn's palm and it fell, 3 feet of air, then marble. The crystal face cracked from the 9 to the 3. The quartet kept playing for another 4 bars before the nearest musician noticed the stillness spreading through that corner of the room and trailed off. By then, the damage was already done. People nearby had turned, cameras had paused, Corbett was looking at the floor and not at Wyn. She knelt by herself and picked the watch up, held it in both hands for a moment. The mechanism was still running. She could feel the movement against her palm. That almost made it worse. She stood. She looked at Zinara, then at Corbett, then at Hildred, who had arranged her face into the particular expression of women who blame the one who is bleeding for making the room uncomfortable. "You're causing a scene," Corbett said, close to her ear. Clean yourself up." Zenara tilted her head. "It's just an old watch face." Wynne looked at the crack in her hands. She thought about her grandfather's bench. She thought about her mother's hands, thin but steady, pressing the watch into her palm, the way you press something into the hands of someone you need to carry it forward for you. She thought about every morning she had walked into this building at sunrise and signed the documents that kept it standing, while Corbett stood in rooms across the city, using its name like an inheritance he had earned. "You have no idea what you just touched," she said. Her voice was quiet. She was not performing grief for anyone in that room. She closed her hand around the damaged watch, turned, and walked out. No slap, no scene, no final word for Corbett. Just the back of her dress moving through the crowd toward the service exit, and the sound of her own heels on the floor, and behind her the resumed murmur of 400 people who would spend the rest of the evening, turning what they had just seen into a story, without knowing they had witnessed only the opening of one. Oswin was waiting in the private corridor with an umbrella and a quiet fury that he kept to himself, because he understood timing. He did not ask her how she was. "Preserve every camera feed from tonight," she said. "Main floor, side entrance, the corridor outside the styling salon, all of it." He nodded once and made the call before she reached the stairwell. The cavern archive at night was a different building. Display cases locked, overhead lights off. Only the preservation glass burned over the document tables, steady and low, the temperature controlled year-round, because old paper and old metal do not forgive variation. Bex was there when Wynne arrived, still in her gala clothes, the cracked watch in her palm. She laid it on the velvet tray. Bex looked at the crystal for a long time. She covered her mouth with one gloved hand. "Your mother wore it to the 2007 shareholder vote," Bex said, barely above a whisper. "The one where they tried to dilute the founding family's stake. She walked into that room wearing this and walked out with every vote she needed. I was 22. I had never seen anything like her." Wynne put both hands on the edge of the table and bent her head forward. She cried. Not tidily, not briefly. The kind that accumulates over years of being gracious in rooms where you were being diminished and arrives all at once when you have finally stopped being gracious. She cried for every dinner where Hildred had looked past her, for every investor event where Corbett had borrowed Carvon's name and worn it like something he'd found. For every night she had told herself it would get better if she waited a little longer. She cried because the watch her grandfather had built with $60 and borrowed tools was cracked, and because the man she had chosen had watched it happen and called it her problem. Then Merrick Toll, 51, her private attorney and the legal trustee of the Carvon Legacy Trust, arrived through the side entrance with rain on his coat and 3 sealed folders and the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who have spent their careers walking into rooms after the worst has already happened. He placed the folders on the table. He looked at the cracked watch. Then he looked at Wynne. "Tell me what order you want," he said. The weeks that followed existed in 2 separate worlds. In one, Corbett told people Wynne was struggling emotionally. He said it with a careful sadness, the way people frame the behavior of others when they want the room to pity them for it. Hildred told her donor circle that the gala had confirmed what she had always suspected, that Wynne lacked the constitution for serious public life. Zenara appeared at 3 industry luncheons in the days after the gala and was photographed at 2 of them beside Corbett, never quite touching him but always within reach. Prella posted a photograph from the gala on her social pages. It was cropped. Wynne was not in it, Zenara was. The caption read, "Some women are built for rooms like this." In the other world, Wynne arrived at Carvon before sunrise. She reviewed footage with Merrick. She watched Beck's work over the cracked watch under magnification. Not to erase the damage, but to document it precisely, to prepare the first movement for the first time it would be shown publicly in her name. Rance Allard, 39, a licensed private investigator retained by Merrick, sent his first file 4 days after the gala. Time-stamped photographs, clean and impossible to argue with. Corbett and Zenara had entered a private club together less than 12 hours after the gala. They were not being discreet. Zenara wore his jacket over her shoulders. He held the door with the ease of someone who had long stopped keeping track of what he owed. Merrick played the audio file at their next meeting. It had been captured in the open lobby of the club, legally, with no expectation of privacy. Zenara's voice, light and amused. "Did you see her face when it hit the floor?" A pause. "Corbett, she needed to understand where she stands." Wynne listened to it once through. She sat with it for a moment. Then she asked Merrick to put it away and open the next folder instead. The next folder held 3 records she had not asked him to find but had known existed somewhere. The first was documentation of a quiet debt restructuring that had saved Corbett's failed investment vehicle 3 years ago, funded anonymously through the Caervon Legacy Trust's discretionary reserve. The second was a private hospital payment that had cleared Hildred's medical debt from a procedure the family could not afford. The third was a legal settlement protecting Prella from a public lawsuit after a charity event that had gone badly wrong. All of it had come from Wynne, through trust structures that kept her name invisible. None of the three had ever asked who had covered it, none had ever thanked her. She was not sure they had ever wondered. She touched the edge of the papers. "I did those things because I loved them," Merrick said gently. "I know. They did those things because they assumed someone would always be there too." She sat with that a while too. Caervon's International Collector Summit was held on the top floor of the original building, the same floor where Devel Caervon had put his first workshop before the company outgrew it and the space became the archive. 300 attendees, industry press in the designated aisle, the kind of room where the silence, when it came, would travel. Corbett arrived with Zinara, Hildred, and Prella. Fenwick Dale was 2 seats down. They had been placed in the front section exactly where their invitations promised. Hildred surveyed the room with the satisfaction of someone who believes proximity is the same thing as belonging. Prella leaned toward Corbett and whispered something. He smiled. Oswin opened the summit. He moved through the first hour with the calm of a man who has protected something for a long time and is about to stop protecting it alone. When the final item appeared on the program, Founding Archive Presentation, the first movement, the room sharpened. Collectors who had seen everything leaned slightly forward. 2 journalists in the aisle raised their cameras before anything had happened, because they understood from decades of experience that this was about to be worth capturing. Oswin returned to the podium. "The first movement will be introduced tonight by Caervon Timepieces' controlling owner." Corbett scanned the side entrance, expecting someone elderly, someone removed from whatever came next. Wynne walked out from the opposite side of the stage. She wore a dark dress, no heavy jewelry, no markers for people who needed markers. Around her wrist was a narrow platinum cuff, plain to most of the room, unmistakable to anyone in the industry who knew what it signified. Oswin stepped to the side, his voice was clear and precise. "Wynne Caervon," he said into the microphone, "controlling owner of Caervon Timepieces and sole trustee of the Caervon Legacy Trust." Hildred's champagne glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Prella's phone slipped from her fingers. Fenwick looked at the folder in his lap, then at the stage, then at the folder again, as if one of them might change. Corbett stared at Wynne with an expression she recognized, because she had not seen it on his face since the very early days of knowing him. The look of someone who has just realized how much they have misread. She did not look at him first. She stood beneath the presentation light and placed the first movement's display case on the stand. The watch lay inside in black velvet, restored and protected behind glass, the cracked still crystal face from the 9 to the 3. Documented, visible, preserved exactly as Bex had prepared it. "My grandfather built this in a single room with $60 and a set of borrowed tools," Wynne said. "He didn't have investors. He didn't have a name anyone had heard of. He had a mechanism he believed in and a family he wanted to build something lasting for." The screen behind her showed Devel Caervon's original bench photographs, then Selma's portrait, wearing the watch at the 2007 shareholder vote, then the magnified image of the crack. "This piece was damaged recently," Wynne said, "in a public room by someone who did not understand what they were touching. That moment is on record. What is also on record is that the people who were there, who knew me, chose not to intervene." The room was completely still. Merrick stepped forward from the side aisle. His voice was even and unhurried. "Caervon Timepieces has authorized no partnership agreements, acquisition discussions, investor mandates, or representation rights to any individual or entity operating under the Mays name or to Fenwick Dale or any associates thereof. All materials suggesting Mays family affiliation with Caervon's operations are unauthorized. Caervon has initiated legal review of the distribution of those materials and the fraudulent loan documentation circulated in its name." He did not need to raise his voice. The room was already silent enough that ordinary speech carried to every corner. Fenwick stood, then sat. Across the room, 2 of his investors were already looking at their phones. Corbett rose from his seat. A security officer stepped quietly into the aisle beside him. Wynne looked at Corbett for the first time since she had walked onto that stage. Her expression was not angry. It was something cooler than anger. The face of someone who has finished waiting for something that was never coming. "I didn't come here to humiliate you," she said. "I came here to stop carrying you." He looked at the display case, at the cracked watch inside the glass, the one he had watched fall on a marble floor, and called her embarrassment. And she saw on his face the moment he understood what he had been standing inside for 6 years, without once looking at the ceiling to ask whose name was on the building. Merrick was at the end of the private corridor, with an envelope and a process server in a dark coat, when Corbett came through 10 minutes later. The server placed the envelope in Corbett's hand. "You've been served," Merrick said. "Divorce petition, preservation notice on all Mays-affiliated communications involving the Caervon name. Injunction against Fenwick Dale's investor materials, pending fraud review." Zinara appeared at the corridor entrance in her silver dress, looking from Corbett to Wynne and back, recalculating something. For the first time all evening, no one was saving Corbett. Not Hildred, not Zinara, not the woman he had spent 6 years standing aside while she quietly held everything up. He turned to Wynne once more. "You should have told me who you were." "I did," she said, "every day. You just only listened for titles." She walked back through the door. In the weeks that followed, things fell the way quiet things fall, not all at once, but one door at a time. Fenwick's investor relationships unraveled when the fraudulent loan documentation was made public. Collectors who had been circling the Mays-affiliated proposals withdrew within 48 hours. Hildred's donor circle went silent. Prella's deleted posts existed in enough screenshots that the deletion accomplished nothing except confirming she had known what she was doing when she posted them. Zanara lost 3 event contracts in a single week. Vila Dunn's employers asked her to take a leave of absence after Merrick's legal filings named the lobby audio, in which her voice also appeared. The fall was not dramatic all at once. It was worse than that. It was quiet and cumulative and thorough. The kind of accounting that happens when the person who had been subsidizing your credibility stops doing so, and the room realizes simultaneously that you were never standing on your own. Before sunrise on the 3rd morning after the summit, Wynne returned to the Caervon archive. Bex was already there. She had prepared a new case for the first movement, larger, lit from within, positioned beside Darvel Caervon's portrait and Selma's. The crack in the crystal was still visible. Wynne had asked her to keep it that way. Oswin stood at the back of the room. "Will you stay public now?" he asked. Wynne looked at her grandfather's face, then her mother's, then the watch. "Yes," she said, "not because they broke me, because I am done letting people borrow what they could never have built." 1 month later, she stood before the first gathering of the Caervon Founders Initiative, a new program supporting women in early-stage precision craft, funded by the charity auction that had opened at the summit and raised 3 times its goal before the night was over. Reporters were there. Her name was on the podium. The first movement's display case was visible behind her, the crack across its face clean and deliberate and fully in the light. They had thought they could diminish a woman by breaking what she loved. All they had done was give the truth enough witnesses to make it permanent.